Welcome to Design 1 session. If I could have your attention. We are going to start off with Peter Bryant on harnessing the power of the massive.
Right, as it says there, my name is Peter Bryant. I'm going to take this off so I can walk around. My name is Peter Bryant. I'm from the London School of Economics and Political Science in the United Kingdom. And this presentation is, along with my absent colleagues, Chris Fryer and Darren Moon, who we couldn't afford to send over. So I got to come. So, for those of you who don't know about the LSE, we are a single faculty social science institution based in the centre of London, and we have about 10,500 students. In the UK, we're considered to be one of the sort of elite universities in the United Kingdom, and as such, we've had a path trod to our door over many, many years from people offering us alternatives to delivering our materials. Some of our academics are world leading in their fields. We have people like Thomas Piketty, who is sort of one of the leading economists in the world, who work for us. And of course, our content in that sense is worth a hell of a lot to other people. For us, though, we looked at why we are a single faculty institution in social science, and what makes social science really interesting to us is the potential of social science to transform society and transform the world. And tying in with what George said this morning about the power of online learning and the power of MOOCs to transform society and the role of the humans in it, it was something that fascinated us as an institution, but wasn't really being delivered by any of the other sort of MOOC providers. So, for us, we asked ourselves some simple questions, and this is actually our building just about to be demolished. Most modern pedagogy is pretty scaffolded, sequential, aligned, and structured. In that sense, you go from week 1 to week 2 to week 3 to week 4, you complete, you get some sort of certification, and there's this idea that you need to build knowledge up through successive iterations of learning something, sort of the whole idea of crawling before you walk. However, what we also realise, particularly in our world, is that learning, living, sharing, acquiring, connecting and experiencing rarely are as scaffolded and structured as that. There's this wonderful museum in Zagreb in Croatia called the Museum of Broken Relationships, which is all about ephemeral items that are left behind when a relationship breaks up. And it's such a snap point in time that isn't particularly sequential, and you sort of have to work your way around it, not knowing what happened before or after, but still trying to identify and understand the story. So we don't live our lives in particularly sequential ways, yet most of the education we deliver is quite sequential. So we asked ourselves the questions: what if learning could actually be informal? It could be community-led, it could be non-linear, it didn't have to be week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4. It could be democratic as a process. It could solve problems rather than simply providing the skills by which people could solve other problems. It would be collaborative. It could be chaotic. It may not actually be particularly ordered. It might be actually challenging and difficult for the learners inside it. But in that sense, it might be aspirational, emancipatory, and even open. So before we started, we asked ourselves these very simple questions. But then we also just said, well, if our content is important and potentially society shaping, we want to do this at a massive scale. We have 10,000 students, and that's all we can take on our very cramped central London campus. We don't have a particularly massive online provision. We have some public events that are well attended, but they're not necessarily for our students. So, I'm going to talk about a project we worked on called Crowdsourcing the UK Constitution. It's probably quite important, locating myself as we are in the United States, explaining that the UK does not have a constitution, which is quite it's actually a fact. We're one of about 6 countries in the world that don't have a constitution: New Zealand, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and Canada, I think, has a sort of semi-undefined constitution. It may not be officially declared as an unwritten constitution. What we have is an 800-year-old document called Magna Carta, which was the 800th anniversary this year. We have then over 40 different acts of parliament, treaties and the like that form our constitution. So there's been a belief from a number of people in our school, which is, why don't we have a written constitution? Most other countries do. What would a written constitution for the United Kingdom look like? And how do you construct one in a modern era when, a lot of these documents are sometimes centuries old? and based on a whole lot of actually quite boring and dry, dull constitutional law. But what we're also interested in is that when these things were written, there wasn't this wonderful thing called the internet. And all of this is now occurring in an environment of digital citizenship. And what we're really interested in is not just how you learnt to be a digital citizen, nor what a digital citizen actually was, which is the kind of process of engaging in civic engagement, or doing civic engagement through the internet. But we're really interested in, could you actually learn through being a digital citizen? I mean, certainly, as you may tell, my accent isn't English, my accent is Australian. We didn't have the kind of civics education that the United States has, but we sort of learnt the process of what it meant to be a citizen through action, through voting. We are one of the few countries in the world where voting is compulsory. So therefore, everyone votes in Australia over the age of 18. Although that could be slightly misconstrued and say it's actually compulsory to attend to vote, not to actually vote itself. So, what was this project? And that is King John, who wrote Magna Carta, using his laptop, as he did. It was a three-stage project run by our Institute of Public Affairs. They started doing it twice. Once had about 40 people involved. The second platform had about 12 and was derailed by one person who answered every single question on the platform about whether it be about council ordinances of dogs or garbage collection or human rights with England needs a queen. And so they shut the platform down through a slight lack of interest. For them, this wasn't an educational project. This was a civic engagement project. They wanted to crowdsource the UK Constitution. They wanted all of the UK population to be involved and come up with this Constitution. They gave us a very short period of time to make this thing live, about 7 weeks. And what we did is we helped them take participants through the idea of a hacking phase. Well, you know, this is a very dry, dull constitutional thing. How do you get people involved in writing about it? Well, you start them hacking why you have a constitution in the first place. We then got them to refine their ideas, and the idea of the platform was that they generated ideas about the clauses of a platform. The whole crowd generated it amongst 10 different challenges. So we didn't sort of say, come up with a constitution. We sort of said, okay, look, around human rights, around a head of state, around a whole variety of other clauses, what things should be in our constitution? So they came up with ideas, they refined those ideas as a crowd, they prepared them, and in the end we had a big sort of both virtual and real event where they hacked together a constitution. What we wanted to make sure was that the entry and exits into this were open and flexible. There wasn't a week 1, there wasn't a week 2. You could come in at any point in time into the platform and start to actually engage. And we ran this project for 14 weeks. So what we decided to do was apply our online learning design to thinking about how we would deliver this outcome for them. So what we built, we took a combination of learning approaches. We used community learning, we used informal learning, we used some of the processes that come out of civic engagement around hacktivism. We even tried to leverage something that's often used as a pejorative term, and that being clicktivism. The idea that, you know, participation can simply be a click away. We wanted to integrate a whole lot of participatory practices into this. We wanted people to talk to each other, we wanted people to engage, we wanted people to be social, but we wanted to do it at a massive scale. We didn't want like cliques or small communities to form. We wanted engaged individuals and groups. We didn't want people just to sit back. We wanted people to participate. That's what democracy is about. There were no readings in this. This wasn't a course. So there was no formal documentation. There wasn't an introductory lecture from a renowned professor saying, hello, I'm going to introduce you to Constitutional Law 101. This is a dry topic for a lot of people. So to have a lecture about why is a constitution and what the history of the constitution was of no real interest to our community. We didn't have a lecturer, we didn't have a teacher, we did have a bit of a guru, a guy called Professor Connor Gearty, who was one of the world's leading human rights academics. But his job was to go in there was to point at people and say, now you said something, that's really smart. Or to point at someone else and say, actually what you said, that was really dumb. Now, let's talk about why that doesn't work. Why can't you just murder the Queen and have her hanging from a, pike pole in the centre of Buckingham Palace? There was no sequence to this. If you came in week 1 or you came in week 14, you could participate equally, all the way through. What was really interesting, even though there wasn't an expectation from our colleagues in the Institute, there was an expectation from the people who were in the course or in the program that there was going to be learning going on here. Why? Because it was the institution delivering it. Metrics I'm not that particularly fussed about. It was mainly to put up a photo of baby Tembo, who is a statue at the LSE. But, we had about 1,500 users, 725 ideas around clauses of the Constitution, 125,000 idea views, 1,000 comments. The single most important thing for us is we wrote an 8,500 word Constitution for the United Kingdom. That was legally valid, slightly contradictory, had some really whack clauses, but was presented to the Speaker of the House, was mentioned by the current Chief Minister of Scotland as an example of democracy, and a country who will be probably sometime in the next 5 years a burgeoning democracy of their own. Our cloud produced the Constitution, which is what we really wanted. What was fascinating is our community grew over time. It didn't shrink. We see a lot of these metrics about, X number of sign-ups versus then joiners, and then we went up, we didn't go down. We actually had 55% of our community participating in the final week of the project. What was they doing? A lot of them were not adding new ideas, they were voting ideas up and down. They were participating in a democratic process. 80% of our participants said that they'd gained new knowledge by doing this. 70% said they gained new skills. This is the question. I think I put a question up on Twitter about completions and how we define completions. We asked the question, did you learn something? And this is what they told us. 88% of the participants were influenced by the discussions. 50% stated that they were working with others directly contributed to their learning experience. 50% changed their mind about civic engagement. The thing that we loved, as an institution, of course, is that 70% of participants believe the project changed their perceptions of the LSE. For anyone who understands the LSE has a particular reputation in the United Kingdom for being a small c conservative institution, and very driven by where our graduates end up. That's not where we started. We started training people to be railway administrators. We were a very Fabian, left-wing institution. And for this kind of project to change the view of the LSE was quite a positive thing. So I just want to briefly talk about three things and how this challenged a little bit of sense for us. For us, it was to define what we meant by massive. We weren't concerned about massive by numbers. What we were concerned is, what can a massive group of people do to change society? How do we leverage this massive to be more than just a number? How do we realise that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts? These were not people participating as individuals. These were people participating as a community using a variety of methods to learn from each other, from their own desire to learn, from challenging others, from questioning others, from debating others. And for us, it was a process of redefining what the massive actually means. It's not simply a metric of number or representation or activity, but a massive around common experience. This was, in some ways, a little bit of a cheap shot between whether you talk about a community learners or a learning community, because there isn't really particular definitional differences between them. But what we were looking at is, how do you extend a community of practice, so these people who all have something in common, interest in Constitution, how do you extend that to be a learning community? Sorry. How do you deal with community formation and citizenship? How do you deal with people owning that community, not feeling that they were just a cog in a wheel, that they were actually a fundamental part of the community? How were they rewarded for participating in the community? There was no certificate, there was no badges. It was a slight gamification aspect, but generally, what were they rewarded for? How do you keep momentum over 14 weeks? How do you keep it sustainable? How do you keep people engaged? How do you get 55% of people participating in the last week? And how do you deal with the fact that you've got, coming into this, a whole lot of variable learning trajectory schemas and pathways? We didn't ask for a lot of information. This wasn't a traditional course. People came in for a variety of reasons. One of the probably most important things we did was engage with all these special interest groups who are interested in this, the monarchists, the Republicans, and we said to them, don't try and destroy this process, whether you like it or not. Come in and write something. Tell us what you think. Bring your members along. And what was great was Liberty, which is one of the big Republican groups in the United Kingdom. They brought in nearly 500 people. We thought they'd just spend up talking about bringing the Queen down. But they didn't. They filtered through the rest of the community, and engaging those groups, so not just engaging individuals, but engaging groups helps. And we also wanted to contest what it meant to be open. Because we had no beginning or ending, open is something that is particularly important to contest. The notion of digital citizenship as something that is equally open. Opening up the academy and what it means, because the LSE is, as I said, quite a privileged institution, it's quite hard to get into. This is something which is considered to be part of our activity, to open it up. We wanted to embrace non-linearity. And we really wanted to talk about open in its truest sense. So it wasn't that once you signed up, you got access to it. You could look at anything on the platform. You could look at any of the debates, any of the comments, any of the process without signing up. But the moment you signed up, you started putting your name to things. And that created a very different relationship. So I just want to leave you with 3 simple questions. What happens when you empower a community like this to learn and engage in social change? This is a project that is very rooted in social science and very rooted in digital citizenship. But can it be more than civic engagement? Could you use this model of people actively engaged as a community in a non-linear way to solve particular problems? We have this wonderful example that we're piloting as our second test, which is around climate change. We're getting people to send in photos of their own local areas that have been affected by climate change. What we will have, we hope, is a collection of tens of thousands of photos of climate change. It's a brilliant data set, and if you're an academic, that's like manna from heaven. But more importantly, you've got this wonderful collective computing process to look at all those photos. Anyone who may be around my age, remember the old SETI project? Anyone has heard of the SETI project? Where they used to let data from distant satellites processing the computer in the background? This is kind of a human SETI project. And does this help to build a more informed digital citizenry? Yeah, a group of people who are informed not just about what digital citizenship is or what social science can do, but actually act and use that through their own processes. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
So we have time for maybe 2 questions, and while we're taking those, is Nina here for her presentation?
No, it's us presenting.
Okay, yeah. Well, if you want to come up and load up your presentation while we take some questions. Just one of these? So here you go. All right, I'm going to hand a microphone out to anyone who has a question.
That was a great talk. Thank you very much. If I could ask you to make maybe 1 or 2 more steps that I think your presentation gestures towards. Do you see kind of like a collective project like this? Would it be possible to apply this type of method to more traditional MOOCs? And I wonder if we would see similar results. Like if we had a collective project in a physics class or a chemistry class, do you think we would see this type of participation and retention?
I mean, I guess for us, because it is very much based in a social science, I would be guessing. But my guess would be, we know that social learning is an effective model of learning across the disciplines and across the age groups. We know that even in more traditional areas, collaborative work with students works. We also know that's what they usually end up doing in their employment as well. But you know, you take the example I talked about around the climate change thing. So you could take that same data set and instead of looking at it from a policy perspective, you could actually start to look at it from a geography perspective. You could start to look at it from a climate science perspective and use that same information, that same data set to deliver exactly the same kind of outcome. What we did work out with this is that this is very specific to a purpose. All education needs to have a purpose. All pedagogy needs to have a purpose that you're aiming towards. The purpose for this is we have a problem to solve. We have an outcome to deliver. If it's simply a dissemination of information project, then I don't think it would necessarily work.
Thank you very much.
Okay, 1 more question. We can get started.
Yep.
Yes. Okay.
Okay,
Yes,
thank
we'll
you.
get started. Great. Okay, so the next presentation is Pedagogical and Technological Concepts for Collaborative Learning in MOOCs by Julia and Tobias.
Yes, thank you. So, my name is Julia Erdmann, and thank you. This is Tobias Hecking. We are from Ruhr-University in Bochum and University of Duisburg-Essen in Germany. And we are here today to give a talk about pedagogical and technological concepts for collaborative learning in MOOCs. The project is funded by the Mercator Research Center, which you probably don't know.
Can you use the mic?
Yes, thank you. This morning, George Siemens raised the question of how we can make education more humane, or how to better connect people in online education and make it more social. To bring small group collaboration into MOOCs might be one way to facilitate social factors such as social relatedness. As we know from decades of research on collaboration, small group collaboration can facilitate learning on different levels. Besides social relatedness, it can foster motivation, and of course it can help students on a cognitive level by, for example, sharing or exchanging information. And small group collaboration is, however, not well sorry. It's not a well elaborated subject yet in MOOCs, so this is why on the one side we want to investigate the impact that small group collaboration can have on learning with MOOCs, and on the other side, if we turn it around, we can also see the great potential of MOOCs that research on small group collaboration can profit from. Their diversity and high number of participants, for example, has great potential for deriving data from learning analytics methods. And this is where the loop closes, because these analytics could then form the basis for forming and supporting groups in new ways. Before I introduce you to our project, I will briefly position our project in the realm of MOOCs. The course we are running is not a MOOC in particular, but a MOOC-like course. We locate our course somewhere in between the concept of a MOOC as offered by Coursera or edX and that of a SPOC, which is a small private online course. Most of you probably know the concept. The course was open for two large universities, which is Ruhr-University of Bochum and University of Duisburg-Essen. The universities both have more than 40,000 students each. However, the course was not open for a general public, and it was not massive, as in our first run it did have not thousands but hundreds of participants. It is bigger than a typical SPOC though, and more open, as many students from different study programs from two universities can participate. Another difference is that differs from a MOOC, that the course credit was relevant for the participant study programs. Like in a MOOC, our course comprises of purely online learning activities that incorporate typical style elements of a MOOC, such as video lectures and automatically evaluated assignments, as well as discussion forums as communication tools. So back to our project. To achieve our goal, which is to bring effective small group collaboration in, I will now call it online courses, not MOOCs, We are lucky to have a perhaps special consortium because it comprises of researchers from very diverse research domains. This diversity allows us to elaborate our research topic from very diverse perspectives. We have in our consortium expertise on educational psychology with a background especially in computer-supported collaborative learning. And we have expertise on social psychology with a focus on the use of new media and communication. And we have expertise on learning and knowledge technologies based on learning analytics. With these competencies, we are working on the following questions. First, how do we need to compose and structure groups to make group work in MOOCs efficient? Second, how do we get students motivated to make group work in MOOCs efficient? And third, how does the instructional material need to look like to make group work in MOOCs efficient? So, in this talk we are going to focus on the study 1, which is about group formation. So let's first of all have a look at the structure of the group assignments and the overall appearance of the course. So here on the left-hand side you can see organizational elements like a calendar, and there's space for assignments as well as news. And in the middle you can see the green tabs which represent the topics or the lessons. And when you unfold them you can see the materials and activities such as the video and literature. Then we have the quiz, and we have additional or optional literature, and the subject that is central for our research, the group assignment. For this we provide 2 different work environments. We have a threaded discussion forum where students can coordinate their group work and ask questions of any kind, and then we have a real-time text editor where students can simultaneously edit their text or their product. So.
Okay, so I'll take over. So as Julia already said, the major concern of our project is on learning groups and small groups in learning groups in MOOCs, especially with regard to group formation. Group formation is not a new topic. It has a long tradition, but it is still of interest in pedagogy. However, in MOOCs, things get a bit complicated since we have a high number of participants. Manual assignment of learners to groups is simply intractable. So, but on the other hand, we gather lots of learner-generated data through the platform. For instance, resource usage, contributions to discussions, quiz results, and so on. In our approach, we call it analytical group formation, is to make use of this data to form heterogeneous groups of students with diverse characteristics and homogeneous groups with students with similar characteristics. Our assumption is that heterogeneity is beneficial for group learning in general. And we can also use the large amount of data and the diversity of the participants in MOOCs to establish heterogeneity. So we evaluated the approach into small group tasks with 30 groups, each of 4 students. And in group task 1, we formed heterogeneous and homogeneous groups based on resource usage, means students' coverage of optional and mandatory literature, coverage of videos and attempted quizzes. In the second group task, we used data gathered through group task 1 to form groups based on activities in the group discussion forum. So we'll skip the next slide since we're running a bit out of time and go directly through to the results. We have some initial findings. As I said, we have group task 1. Students used collaborative writing and discussion forum. Then we used the activity data from the discussion forum, namely the number of characters posted in the discussion forum, the text quantity, to establish homogeneous and heterogeneous groups for group task 2. And what we find in homogeneous groups with all students have a high level of previous group activity, they are still the most active groups. But they're far above the homogeneous average and homogeneous low groups. But surprisingly, we see that heterogeneous groups are also above average and low level groups, so that we can conclude that forming heterogeneous groups might increase the overall activity of the course. When we now compare students within a class, namely high, average, low, we see that high-level students post a similar quantity of text to the discussion forums in homogeneous and in heterogeneous groups. So heterogeneous groups are slightly, in heterogeneous groups they post slightly more on average, but it's not significant. In contrast to that, in the low-level students posted significantly more when they were assembled in homogeneous group with other low-level students. Yeah, so they are far from the text quantity of the high-level students, but for the low class of low-level students, in homogeneous groups they were much more active. One possible explanation could be that we have to face something like social loafing. So a low-level student in a heterogeneous group can rely on the high-level and average-level students to do the job. But in groups with all low-level students, they have to become active to some extent in order to solve the group task. Second finding was that in most of the groups we had at least one inactive member. Inactive means has not posted to the group forum or not participated in the collaborative writing activity. And the question now is we aim to answer in the upcoming months is, how do groups deal with inactive members? Do they suffer from inactivity, or can they compensate a certain number of inactive members? So this is something we need to find out. A third finding, we have asynchronous collaboration. We have no face-to-face activities, and the posts to the group discussion forums and activity in the collaborative writing tool is the only way the only channel in which it becomes visible to other group members that their teammates are active, that they're working on the assignment. We have here two examples for activity trajectories. So each lane corresponds to the activity of a particular student over time. So blue circles mean forum posts, red rectangle means it has written something in the collaborative writing tool. And we often find groups with large activity gaps. In such groups, we often discover forum posts like, who are you? Are you still with me? Or we also received emails where students asked whether there are technical problems, since their group members, their teammates do not post something to the group forum. And this is really a major challenge for group learning in MOOCs to overcome this deficit of group awareness. On the other hand, we have well-coordinated groups where we see that there is a direct and an immediate response to each forum post, and we also see some kind of periodical pattern of active periods and inactive periods. So these groups are well coordinated and are much more productive than the other groups. So last slide. So based on these initial findings, we could identify 3 future challenges. First, we need to create better conditions for effective group work. This could be, for instance, the reformation of groups if the number of inactive members becomes too high, time scheduling to overcome this, let's say, issue with group coordination when students have different times when they work for the course. And we need suitable assignments for collaboration. Second challenge is activation. So we have some dropouts, so they will never be active at all, but there are potential active participants, and we need mechanisms to activate them to participate in group works. This could be, for instance, incentive elements like badges or scaffolding in form of active prompting. And third challenge, we need to enhance the accountability. This could, for example, be achieved through peer reviewing and feedback, so that the students feel a bit more responsible for the outcome of the group work. And we can also try to overcome this social loafing effect by different group compositions. So that is all. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, thank you. So we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions, and Drew, if you want to set up, I'll bring the mic over. Do you have a question?
Thank you both for your talk. My question is around, I was really interested in your conversation about heterogeneity in groups. And I was wondering if that is particularly relevant to the subject matter that's being discussed. This is sort of like one of those holy wars that you get into when you start talking about group work. And one of the things that I've heard a lot is that it depends on the course type. So I'm wondering if that's something that you've thought about or have thoughts on.
Yes, we have thought about it, and this is a really good question. Yeah, you're right. There are group assignments that are much more suitable for group work, like assignments that require discussions among the participants, that require exchange of opinions and knowledge. These kinds of assignments are much more suitable, but there are assignments that can be better solved by individuals. The same is true for courses. If we have, for instance, let's say an art class or a math class. So there are different types of assignments in such courses that are more suitable or less suitable for group work. So this is, for sure, this is something we consider on the pedagogical level in our project.
Anyone else have one more question? Okay, great. Thank you. So our next presentation is Credentialing MOOCs and an Open Degree by Drew Ross.
Hi guys, this is going to be probably really hard for me because I'm kind of a walker, and being stuck here behind the podium is going to be a little difficult, but I'm going to give it a try. So, by the way, just in case you don't catch it later, my email address is the easiest email address in the world to remember. It's just my name @kaplan.edu, so if you want to get in touch, please do. This is going to be a total change of pace from what we've been talking about. I'm actually going to be talking about kind of the administrative and structural functions around a degree that we've created that allows students to use MOOC learning and OER learning to earn a degree. So, without further ado, let me tell you a little bit about what Open College is. Open College is a brand new division of Kaplan University. Kaplan University, as you guys probably know, was owned until very recently by the Washington Post Company. Kaplan Inc. was owned by the Washington Post Company. And so we have kind of, for a very long time, had this long tradition of trying to do things a little bit differently from the way a lot of our competitors have done them. And one of the things that we've done recently is we've said, all right, you know, we've got this degree, and it's not the degree I'm about to tell you, but we've got all these other degrees at the university, and they're, you know, relatively high cost. How do we turn things around and create a very low-cost degree for students that allows them to have a lot of flexibility and allows them to do essentially what we know from feedback from students they want to do? So in 2014, the Open College was created and was given 3 major tasks. One was to handle all of the university's prior learning assessment. So at Open College, we do all of the assessment of experiential learning, work-based learning, volunteer learning, that sort of thing. We also have open courses. We started our first open courses in 2012, and we have, I think at this point, 8 of them that are running. We have 12 of them that are theoretically active, but only 8 of them are running right at this moment. And they really run the gamut. They're all based on original Kaplan University courses, and they are for things that you would expect they would be about. We have one on communications, we have one on basic introductory composition, we have a math course, things like that. So very sort of general ed courses. And then last year, the university started an open degree, a Bachelor of Science in Professional Studies. And I wish BSPS had not been taken by Paralegal Studies, but it has. So we are the BSPR and not BSPS. The open degree looks kind of like nothing that most people have seen before, and then will have echoes of things that people will have seen before. The idea behind the Bachelor of Science in Professional Studies is that it is a generalist program. There is really no specific focus area to the degree. It's kind of an interdisciplinary degree that allows a student to focus on whatever area he or she needs for a career. And we call it a distributed competency-based education program because we actually don't deliver any of the curriculum. The curriculum comes from other people. The curriculum probably comes from you guys, and we're not the actual deliverers of that, with the exception of one class, and that's the capstone course that we've created. We have a couple of other kind of, they're not actual courses, they're like tutorials that we've got for teaching students professional competencies. Things like teamwork and leadership, working in multicultural and diverse environments. And then there's also one about professional presence. So we do teach mini courses on those things, but generally all the courses students take, from general chemistry to advanced accounting, come from elsewhere. So here's the structure of how the program works. Here's the sequence. A student starts out with us, they enroll, and then we do a prior learning audit for them. We work with them to determine how much credit they should get from other sources, from their previous learning, from transfer. We then have a faculty member work with the student to develop an individualized learning plan that really does speak to what the student wants to do with his or her degree. And then here's where things go a little different. And this is where a lot of people ask a lot of questions. So, you know, feel free to come back and ask me questions about this later. What we do is we take Kaplan University course outcomes and we match them up with very broad categories. So in the ILP, the student won't see, you need to take Biology 103. They will see, you need to take a 100-level biology course. And so what we'll do is we'll give them the Kaplan University catalog and we'll say, okay, do any of these 100-level biology courses look interesting to you? And the student almost always says, okay, yeah, that one looks really interesting to me. And so what we do is we give the student the outcomes. We say, okay, that course has these 5 outcomes. And then we work with the student to find OER, MOOCs, other open education resources that will allow the student to master those outcomes. We have a proprietary matching tool that we created that actually, if you enter in the names of the outcomes, you enter in the language, it actually matches up with MOOCs and OER, connected up through things that you guys probably already know about, things like OER Commons, that sort of thing. And we say, okay, well, for outcomes 1 and 3, this MOOC might help you. For outcome 4, this piece of OER might help you. And for 2 and 5, we've got this other MOOC, or here's another MOOC that might help you. And we also do have some of our own open courses. So in the situations where ours match up, we always pair them with ours first. And then the student goes off, and this is a self-paced program also. The student can take however much time he or she would like to complete his or her learning. When the student feels ready to come back, the student comes back, and we do an assessment of learning. And I'll come back to that. Once the student has filled in all the slots on the degree plan, the student does a capstone course, and the capstone course assesses all the program level outcomes for the BSPR, and then the student graduates. So, I've kind of already gone through this a little bit, but the interesting thing about this that is a little bit different from other models that you've seen that look like this is that we do have our own special tool that goes through and scrapes all the information that we can find. It's an API-based program that just does a whole lot of scraping and grabs information about all the MOOCs, all the OER it can possibly get its hands on. And then when we have a conversation with a student, we use that information to identify resources that might match up well. So here's how we do the assessing. This is always a question people want to know about. We, in some situations, have challenge exams. So we'll have an exam for that Biology 103 class. And so we can just give the student the exam and say, all right, show us that you know this stuff. But a lot of our courses don't have challenge exams. So we needed a method to figure out how to assess that learning. So what we did is we created something called a panel. And a panel is very similar to a very qualitative, evidence-based challenge exam. All it is it's a portfolio of new learning. That's where you get the PAN_EL. We like little letters in our abbreviations, don't we? So what the panel does is it gives us a chance to say, here's a list of 8 pieces of evidence that a student who has mastered all those Biology 103 outcomes will be able to supply us. We want you to choose 5 of these. Half of those have to be writing intensive elements, so we want to make sure that we're assessing writing throughout the curriculum as well. And you've got 2 weeks to do it. Knock yourself out. But not really knock yourself out. And the students really do take to this very, very well. This is an environment that they really kind of thrive in. And we've had, I think, 11 students so far go through the panel process for, I think, 3 classes each, and they are every single one of them is passed. All these assessments are pass-fail, and we always make sure that on the evidence creation list side and also on the evaluation side that we have a faculty subject matter expert. So what we've done recently is we went to our students and we talked to them a little bit about their experience with the BSPR. Now, as you can imagine, the BSPR is an experience that is pretty much unlike anything that students will have seen before. So we wanted to find out how well they were taking to this and what kinds of difficulties they had, what kinds of things they saw as important to their success. So we did a very, very long study that involved lots of interviews with our students. We interviewed almost everybody, and we had an approximately 45-minute conversation with each of our students, asking them only 5 questions, 5 very open-ended questions. And they really, really like to talk about their experiences. Here's what we found. Students almost universally identified advisor support and faculty support as the most critical thing to their success. If they didn't have faculty support, they couldn't make it through. And we know that that's true, even though we're not actually delivering courses to them. We're not actually teaching them the content. They still said we need the conversations with the faculty members. These are the faculty members, remember, that created the ILP with them, and that also the faculty member guides them to resources that will help them master their learning. Students across the board said that they loved driving their own learning. They kept using that language, driving my own learning. I love that I'm able to drive everything. So that refers both to pace and it also refers to choice. Students really were very clear that this was not anything that they had experienced before, and they really liked that. This was, in almost every single one of the cases, our students have a significant amount of previous college experience. So these are not brand new learners. These are not kids right out of high school. These are people in generally their 30s, 40s, and 50s. And they all identified this as being something that was unique and something that was really beneficial to them. And then the last bit here is that they really appreciated the transparency of the program, and it made them care more. So this gets at something we heard about earlier about identifying what was going on, making the students the learners, the students the teachers and the teachers the learners. If you think about this, if you're able to identify what you need to do and why you need to do it, and this really lays bare why you need to do what you're doing, I think it really does help increase motivation. And students really identified that their motivation for this was based largely on the fact that they were in complete control. So that is it. I'm going to stop and let you ask questions. And I just got my 3-minute warning about a minute ago, so it should be good timing.
How would you compare your program to...
Just give you the microphone.
Sorry.
All right. Rob Steiner, American Museum of Natural History. How would you compare your program to the competency-based program of Western Governors University, and do you regard them as direct competitors of yours?
It's a good question. First of all, ours is self-paced, which makes a big, big difference. The Western Governors program is not really a self-paced program. Another big, big difference is that our students are in more contact with faculty members, and they do have contact with subject matter experts if they need it. The faculty in the Western Governors program are essentially they're sort of generalist mentors. So if a student of ours is going to go into a biology course and needs to talk to a subject matter expert, we both have the resources, and we will very willingly, put them in contact with that person and get them the help they need. That's another big difference. But I think the pacing is a big and a very important difference. Charter Oak is doing something that's kind of similar, but again, it's not self-paced. And that's one of the things students identified as important to them.
Putting this into a practice aspect, obviously, because learning, a lot of this learning occurs in practice. There's a lot of programs in the United Kingdom over the last 15, 20 years that have used work-based learning as a sort of measure of assessing prior learning through work. Through some of your measures, do you build in where people have acquired skills through practice?
Well, generally what we do is when we award credit for prior learning, it has to match up pretty cleanly with something that we also teach. It's very hard for us to gauge, if, for example, culinary skills, because we don't teach any culinary programs. So there isn't a way for them to do that. So to some extent, some work-based learning is always going to be lost, especially the stuff that is very kind of place-based and very specific to a particular context. But the more general skills, we're pretty good at assessing. At least I hope we are.
Hi, David Robertshaw, University of Derby. Really interesting model. Thanks very much for sharing it. You said it was quite a lot cheaper for students. What sort of level are the fees? I'm really interested.
Sure. The cost of our regular 4-year degree is somewhere around $50,000 total, all in. The cost for this degree is somewhere around 11. Can be even less than 10, depending on the student and how much credit he or she brings in. So the fees are a monthly fee that a student pays for access to faculty and to the advisors, and that's $200 a month. And then the students pay per assessment. So every assessment they take is $100 in addition to that. They also pay for the capstone course. They pay regular tuition for that, or slightly discounted tuition, and that's somewhere around $2,000.
All right, I think we have time for one more question.
Alice Kessler-Harris, Columbia University. Could you, I'm afraid this is a rather skeptical question, but could you tell us how the quality of the education that you're providing would compare with the quality of an education at a similarly situated university. I'm not thinking of a Columbia, but I'm thinking of an Empire State College, for example, which does similar assessment-based learnings. And related to that question, why do you assume that if a student makes choices, that those choices are necessarily they may produce greater satisfaction, as you indicate, but they may not produce the kind of learning that we would normally expect for a college degree?
Sure, I don't think that I'm privileging student choice over results. What we're saying is that students appreciate this, and not so much that that's meaning that they get better learning or worse learning.
So are you charging students because they appreciate what you're doing, or because you're actually training them to
Well,
do something?
I think your original question was how to compare the learning, and it really depends on the resources they're using. We're guiding them to resources, we're helping them when they have difficulty with whatever they're studying. And the difference between what we're doing and what somebody like Empire State is doing is, if Empire State is delivering the content, let's just say they have, and just like we do, they have a 10-week program in biology, let's say, introductory biology. If a student goes out and has 5 outcomes for a 5-quarter credit biology course, and the student has access to all the OER in the world, and the student spends the entire 10 weeks or spends 6 weeks or whatever using all of those resources that match the student's particular needs, I would venture that a student who's really motivated and efficacious and really understands his or her own modes of learning would be better off in a situation like that than going through sort of a generic program that was just created for a random learner who happens to be 27 and has a background of X, Y, or Z. So it allows a student to really match up his or her own styles with what's out there. And there's a lot out there. I mean, there's a tremendous amount out there. So really, when you ask about the quality, it's not the quality of what we deliver, it's the quality of what the world is delivering at some level. Now, we have to make sure that our assessments reflect something meaningful, and our assessments for these courses match up with our assessments for our regular versions of the courses. So what we're assessing there is the same as what we're assessing with this degree. And those are assessments that have been through our regional accreditor and through the Department of Education. So we are always going to be responsible for quality at that level, and I think that's a really good thing. I wouldn't ever want to do this and have someone just say, well, just rubber stamp it. But it's actually meaningful, and we're held accountable to the meaningfulness of it every 4 years or so.
Thank you, Drew.
Yep, no problem.
So our next presenter is Piotr Mitros, the pedagogy behind OpenX.
Hello, I'm Piotr Mitros, and here we go. And this is the pedagogy behind the OpenX platform and behind the MITx platform that led into it. This is a slight bit of a historical detour. When we were first creating the platform, our goal was to create a platform for exploration of different styles of teaching and learning. And we tried to make the platform modular, both in terms of how the content is designed and how the technology is designed, so we could do that. But when we launched our first courses, we needed to design them in some way, and there was also a very distinct pedagogy to this. To date, we really haven't talked about it very much because we hope to foster communities like this one, learning at scale, and give the community the flexibility to develop the kind of innovation we see here, but we thought this would be good timing to go back and talk about the design principles in our first courses, as well as that the technology was designed to support. So where we started was with a set of principles from learning that I think these represent some of the strongest principles we've come across. Mastery learning, introduced by Bloom, students don't move on until they've mastered a concept. A lot of follow-up work, a lot of disagreement about what the learning gains are, but universal agreement that they're large. Authentic assessment, which I would say a lot of people believe in, but the evidence there is, at the time we were creating the platform, was a little bit weaker. It's a little stronger now. Immediate feedback, continuous formative assessment, letting students monitor what they know and what they don't know. Interactive engagement pedagogy, that basically means having students actively doing things rather than listening to a talk like this one. Constructive learning, where possible having students derive information for themselves. For educators in the crowd, this is different from constructivist learning, which was not something we tried to do at the time. Personalization in the way that Richard Meyer would use the term. And that means having an emotional, personal connection to the instructor. That's something Kahn popularized. Remediation of misconceptions. There are books and conferences on this topic. In contrast to the other ones, the research evidence for this is not non-existent. There's some in the intelligent tutoring systems community, but certainly weaker. And self-regulated learning, which we felt was very important given our diverse audience. But again, that's a place where there's mixed research support. If you look at something like Haiti and Yates, they will give a very nice rebuttal to this. So how did we build these? Actually, before I go on how we built these seemed to work. When we launched our first MOOC, 96% of alumni thought that it was as good as or better than a residential course, and these were mostly college graduates. We've used that course in blended settings at this point, and we've also had tremendous improvements. Our first randomized control trial was at San Jose State University, where completion rates went from 59% to 91%. We've had similar results in less formal trials of other courses at MIT, and one of our physics courses taught by David Pritchard was evaluated relatively rigorous in a MOOC setting, where the pure online format was better than a traditional residential course, although not as good as a blended course. So we have a lot of validation that this at least seems to work. And this pedagogy had a couple of elements to it. One is that it was based on authentic assessment. So when we launched our first course, we in fact did not support multiple choice questions of the platform. The questions were all things like design a circuit, write an equation, give a numeric answer, things that are sufficiently open-ended that there's an infinite set of answers. And what that allows us to do is, first of all, apply mastery learning to our assessments. Students can keep trying until they get it. They can monitor whether or not they understand something simply by whether they've gotten it. And most of these assessments, we now have data, took about 3 or 4 hours per problem to do. So these were complex analysis and design problems. It also, in that portion of the course, students were actively doing something. That's the interactive engagement pedagogy. The knowledge transfer was structured as learning sequences, which are interleaved videos, assessments, pieces of text, interactives. And most of the videos were very short. Most of them were, I would say, under 5 minutes long. In many cases, they were maybe 30 or 60 seconds long. And so students, as they were doing these videos and going through the assessments, could continuously monitor their knowledge. This was an active learning process. And when this was well done, we would have students actually derive information for themselves. If there was a mathematical proof, we would ask them questions, walk them through how to do it, but actually have them do that work themselves. Now, we didn't always do this very well. We were mostly at active rather than constructive, but we occasionally did. And the videos, both one you saw before and this one, were designed to kind of replicate the feel of two people sitting next to each other, one tutoring another one, either on the tablet or on a copy stand or similar. Very personal, very connection. This was popularized by Kahn. We didn't invent this, but we did adopt this. So again, that's a place where we see an interactive engagement pedagogy, a bit of constructive learning, and a personal connection. In our first course, we started with a Q&A forum. Later on, we moved to discussion forums embedded right below every problem and video. That was there for the purpose of remediation of misconceptions. We also had ways for students to easily go to the course text. We had ways for students to easily navigate back if they missed something. All of it was designed that if a student phased out for a minute or didn't understand something, there were additional resources to help them. The Q&A forum in particular worked very well. 92% of questions were answered in our first course. Of those, the quality of answers was very high, and the median time to answer was about 12 minutes. And in most cases, the reason why this works so well is because students wouldn't ask questions. They would look for questions that students already asked. Students read 300 times as many threads as they created. So we had and continue to have very rich remediation. And since then, we've added adaptive hinting. That was work from Stanford OLI. We added a recommender system that was contributed by MIT, both co-developed with edX. So that gives us remediation misconceptions. Self-regulated learning, we're running low on time, but that was primarily these navigational elements where students could skip around easily in a video, skip around easily in a learning sequence. All of those had mouse overs that told you what those were, as well as figure out where they needed to go through integrated assessments. So a lot of students would go in, do the assessments. If they got them right, move on. If they didn't, go back and learn the material. So that's the core of the problem. That's the core of the platform. As we're moving on, we're adding a lot more work in teaching and learning that you'll see coming out in the next few months and years, hopefully. Some of these are edX projects, some of these are projects by research groups around edX. And from there, I'll open up for questions.
Sorry if I missed it, but you said where we're going. You had, sorry, it's Mike Ritchie, I'm from Boeing. You've mentioned where you're going with that. So when you say you're doing active research to look at interaction patterns and the way that knowledge flows across that, what are you actually doing with these features that you have?
Okay, so teams and team projects, I think Leslie could talk more about, but that's being built into the platform right now. We're starting to dip our toes into adaptive. So there was a few collaborations with, primarily actually driven by external OpenEdX contributors around adaptive. Now we're working to try to bring those in-house. That's at fairly early stages. Cohorts is ways to group students, for example, by level. That is in the platform right now. Peer instruction is being done by an external research group. It's been piloted in 1 or 2 courses. Right now we're trying to figure out whether it's something we can bring into the platform. Peer feedback is being developed, co-developed with Cornell. There's a small project around that. We don't know which of these will succeed. These are research collaborations. Crowdsourced hinting is actually being developed in-house right now pretty actively. We launched a pilot with that a year ago. We asked students to contribute hints, basically about an intelligent tutoring system. We're bringing that back into the platform right now. Recommended resources was co-developed with MIT. Students can say, gosh, just help me with this problem or with this video, and other students can see that.
Piotr, we've had this conversation before, I think, and you know I'm a big fan of OpenEdX, but I want to call you on the use of the term self-regulated learning, meaning that the learner simply has flexibility to choose and click through which objects they're viewing or interacting with. Of course, OpenEdX provides that, and that interactivity is something I appreciate, and it's a very good feature. But self-regulated learning involves something that is happening to the learner when they actually have a level of metacognition, when they actually can recognize their weaknesses and strengths and develop strategies for problem solving. So I think you're kind of co-opting the term for describing the platform when it really is not what we mean by self-regulated learning. We've had this conversation before last year, remember?
We did. And I think I generally agreed with you in part and disagreed with you in part. So the problem with actually all of these terms, let me just go back here, is that they mean very different things to different people. And if you sit within a particular research community, they will have a definition. And I agree that the definition of this, as well as actually many other of these terms, is incorrect within some contexts. I can also find contexts where these definitions is how specific groups of researchers use them. The hardest one here, I took out personalization and put in personal connection because that's how Richard Meyer uses personalization, and the intelligent tutoring people get very upset at that use of personalization. Constructive learning is hard because there's no alternative, and the constructivists get very upset at this term. And I can keep going through actually all of these terms, And so it is a question of terminology. I try to explain what I mean by it, but it's certainly the case that a lot of these terms are misleading depending on whether you're a cognitive scientist, traditional teaching background, instructional design background, educational philosophy, physics education research, and so on. It's hard to please all of these groups. So I apologize. I am misusing this terminology badly within many communities.
Very good.
Is there any community that uses the term self-regulated learning to mean something different than what I just described?
I've heard it used the way that I am using it.
By somebody other than you and Alex.
Correct. I am happy to Google around and figure out which groups use it this way, but I have heard this term.
I will challenge you in every conference with the same question.
That's fair. I will come better prepared and figure out which communities use it how before the next conference.
Okay, this is a good debate to carry on to the reception, which is starting at 5:30. It's in the Everett Lounge, which is in Zankel. It's that way. I believe that there's going to be some hall directors to help you get there. Marshall should be directing you out there, but it's over in Zankel building across the way. Thank you.